Okay. um, got about 15 minutes into a young lady and a young man have a yarn up about the idea of all at once time or um, something like that. What she was discussing involved a bunch of technical jargon that there isn't a lot of familiarity with. However, some of the ideas gleaned can be referred back to philosophy. Look at Time as Map, Not Terrain playlist if you want to have some fun with that one. Where the idea is she's talking about her point of view on how there's how the alleged about her ideas about time basically. Um, and she seems to be struggling with the nature of subjectivity versus objectivity. So from this sort of vantage point, as things are right now, with the information available, it seems like that individual, excuse the cough, might be struggling with the difference between subjective and objective reality. So, um, um, this is where it gets really funny with language, English language. Okay, first of all, usually the common part we have to explain why there's a difference between the common parlance use of terms and some of the other variants of the words in English. Why it's kind of important. Usually, this is an object. Okay, this is also an object. Um, um, this would qualify as an object. This would qualify as a subject, and you, the viewer, also as a subject. In other versions of English, the word subject is a synonym for topic. So a subject could be quantum physics or time, and so just those words alone could be a little bit confusing. So usually appreciating them by context might help. So on the nature of subjectification versus objectification, or subjective versus objective perceptions of reality and whatever else experiences of reality. There's a very strong issue with language going on, and so her way of comprehending particular concepts involves using the language associated with the technical profession that she has, which appears to be physics, and she seems quite adroit at expressing those ideas using that language. And so that for those who are familiar with that technical jargon, they'll have their particular appreciation of what those words mean. However, from the perspective of someone who doesn't actually have formal training in physics, however, does have some experience, as in this physical body has some experience with the ideas of how some areas of physics overlap with perception, such as the interactions of solar flares with people's perceptions. This been had an interest in that for quite some time, or artificial radio waves and things like that. The issue is with how it relates to conceptualizing, or getting your head around the idea and sort of framing the idea in a way that's sort of maybe a little bit easier to deal with. Is that they've got all these technical jargons that is, I'm going to be honest, don't necessarily understand them, and to try and frame the ideas that they're talking about. And that technical jargon exists for a reason. Those technical jargons have operational definitions that are required so other members of their profession can assess whether or not those individuals are in fact talking about the same thing, and whether or not they did measure those in labs, or if it's a theoretical construct, for example. So there's a reason for the technical jargon, and there's also a reason why the technical jargon is quite distinct from the way in which a esotericist from the New Age movement, for example, might describe those ideas. So the word simulation, for example, doesn't actually mean the same thing as the movie The Matrix. Anyway, it's not a well understood term. It's just noticed that it's not the same thing. And so the back to the lady and the gentleman as well, but she was the main speaker. Talking about something that suggests that she was trying to figure out the difference between objective and subjective reality. So the main once you get past the jargon, the main idea seems to be that people experience events, okay, as one thing after another. That's usually the common experience of an event. You may have noticed, typically physical bodies get grayer and more wrinkly as they get older. They don't actually, get younger. There are, however, some celebrities who put stuff on their face we won't discuss to create the illusion that they've got younger. But there's a reason why they are literally dickheads for doing so. Oh, I shouldn't have said that, but that's technically true. Anyway, so that perception of time being linear, okay, and one thing happening after the other, on physical space, your normal physical experience of reality, or that what she calls macroscopic, is true. That is a common thing. The events don't go backwards. It's not like, I can play back in. Oh wait, it's got over here again. Anyway, so it's not the same event. It's different events. So, the objective reality is the cigarette lighter. Actually, a particle swarm posing as a cigarette lighter with a human vessel. A massive swarm of particles posing as a human body, technically, to make it even weirder, is allegedly holding said cigarette lighter and putting the light down and then letting go of it. So if you actually were able to perceive of your physical body as someone else's as just a particle swarm, you'd be a bit confused by that. So do you really believe that? So let's talk about to the New Ages for a second on the nature of, not the nature of, but the idea of subjective perception. Okay, New Ages in particular. Okay, and sort of like magician type characters. Oh, did that change the light? That's a coincidence. It happened again. The end doing that or something else? Anyway, so the objective reality for some people and subjective reality are the same thing. So they believe in their perceptions. Okay? For some other people, they don't believe in their perceptions. Okay? For some people, the perceived reality, and the perceived reality and the subjective reality is created by the objective reality. So is subjective, the subjectivity is created by the objective versus the subjective creates the objective versus neither are created, versus something completely different entirely. So, okay, here's something that might help. Light goes to your eyes, right? So the light is immaterial because it's a massless particle. And it goes to your eyes, and your eyes are physical, right? Presumably they're physical, in the sense that they're particles with mass, and a supermassive swarm that's presumed to be greater than a light beam. Okay, so the immaterial massless particle called light, as a beam, wave, or whatever, hits the retina and produces and creates some kind of reaction involving apoptosis theory and neurotransmitters and a bunch of neural networks that leads to the visual cortex at the back there, where the information is assembled in an abstract form and completely sort of like the illusion is maintained by accessing memory along the way to find things that have a similar likeness to the wavelength that is going in there at the time. So the way that this particular colour, so we're going to hazard a guess that the perception of wavelength, or for lack of a better, we're not saying that waves are real at the present tense. Other than we're not saying waves actually exist. What we're saying is that we're not saying that waves are actually physical objects. What we're saying is waves are a unit of measurement to describe objects in motion. So the waves of colour going to you through that, okay, through a series of technological recodifications and transmissions by artificial radio waves and satellites in outer space and all kinds of crazy crap, would you assume that that's pink? Are you seeing the colour pink? What if you're not? What if the device was so inaccurate in its transcoding that it wasn't producing the same for your eyes later on, the same information that was being sent to this device was different from being sent to yours? What if you're, as a physical person somewhere else, imagined physical person somewhere else, perception of what's being called pink is a bit more like orange or something like that, because of your brain's history of perceiving colour. So the assumption that this is pink is just that, it's an assumption, and it's usually the case that the best guess is that people's physical bodies are believed to perceive things close enough to be similar to one another that language is useful. However, in the case of colourblind people, this is where colourblindness is going to help you with this idea of subjective versus objective. If you were a painter and you are a shittier painter than your brother, because this physical body's had that experience before, that they've painted something that had lots of pink on it incidentally, and blue, shades of blue. A large painting that was in a reasonably lit room, hanging on the wall with lots of pink and blue in it. And the younger brother, the younger brother was a better artist who, from at the age of kindergarten, was able to draw complex images from these coasters of the White House, of the coasters that had images of the White House and the Washington Monument and the Liberty Bell and stuff. So someone from the United States had given it to the family as a gift. And this boy, when he was in kindergarten, he was in kindergarten, and he's looked at the coasters, and he's just grabbed a piece of paper, and he's grabbed a pencil, and he's just sat there, and without even getting an eraser out, he's just drawn almost identically the exact shapes of those buildings with the complex little windows in it and the little designs, and attention to detail he did. It's like, and everyone was like, "Wow, mate, you're incredible. You're the best artist in a family of artists. That's brilliant," everyone said. And everyone assumed that guy had epic vision. Absolutely epic vision. He walked around and he said, if he pointed at this object, he'd call it red. Okay, he'd call it red. Like, not no word of a lie, he'd call it red. He'd call green green. There was no reason to believe that poor man had ever had the slightest bit of issue with visual perception. Not even glasses were required. And then one day he was doing his mechanic's apprenticeship. After he'd got his driver's license and been driving for a few years with no problems at all, and he's gone and he's got into his second or third year, so he's learned how to change the disc pads and he's onto complicated electrics then. He got the harder jobs then. And he just couldn't seem to figure out which was the red and which was the green wire. And the head mechanic's gone, mate, do you realise you're doing that? He's gone, and he was unable to figure out that he was what was happening, because his entire life he'd been able to function completely normally, as far as he could tell, and then for some reason he wasn't able. They did a colourblind test on him and found he had been red-green colourblind, which is something that someone's born with. Okay, he was born with what's called red-green colourblindness. And the only other time before that had ever indicated any slight possibility that his eyesight was a little bit different from other people's is that that pink and blue painting. He's gone, why is there so much yellow in it? You put too much yellow in the painting. And everyone's gone, oh, lay off it. There's no yellow in it at all. Because he had red colour blindness, and it just so happened that that particular distortion increases the possibility of perceiving yellow. But usually, this is a fascinating thing how this works. Usually, because he'd spent his whole life with everyone going, that's red. And he's gone, yeah, red. So this object is nowhere near, this object. Not really advertising. This object was nowhere near that object, so there's no confusion possible. Or usually it's green's next to it or something, And so one object at a time, no problem. There's just something about the way that painting was done, where he was able to acknowledge, like, say the word, it's yellow, it's yellow, it's yellow, and but the rest of the time, everything. Language-wise, normal. You hold a red object, he goes, it's red. He wasn't a dummy. He wasn't a dummy. He's an excellent artist. He was even a good mechanic too, by the way. Good driver and mechanic. Right? Red. Green. He knew all the colours, no problem. If you say pass the tomato sauce, it's the red bottle, he'd go, that's tomato sauce. No problem. No problem at all. Really? And so this is the kind of thing that's happening with people with this time stuff. It's that everyone's got this language about time that's everywhere. Clocks, calendars, you name it, right? Okay, and a really complicated languages are developed around that. Philosophy, physics, blah, 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 psychology, you name it. Okay, it's a complicated language around it, and most of the time, the language, if you speak it and speak the same language as the other person, so two physicists talking to each other, for example, the words make sense because they both speak that language. Okay? And so it can be the case that someone speaks the language just well enough, okay, in such a manner that it's not telling the truth about how they're perceiving things at all. So he'll say it's red, and everyone says it's red. What he's actually saying is fucking yellow, right? Okay, right? Okay, and right? Okay, and so it's like, it's a little bit, back to that lady. her and the other physicists saying, oh, the linear rate of time, and then do you have this with the quantum gravity and this and that? And the other physicists going, oh, yeah, we know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And other people are going, well, we've heard of the word gravity and the word quantum, and we've heard the word time, and we know roughly what it might mean when you refer to the perception of time, of, you know, one event happens after the other, one rant on YouTube after another, for example, or whatever. Okay, right, do you really mean the same thing when you talk about experiencing one event after the other? Because perceptually, you can experience events as though they were in the distant past or the distant future. With perception, there is such a thing called precognition. Precognition is an example of perceiving something that hasn't happened yet. Or postcognition, perceiving something that was outside of your time and space. So, you know, something event that wasn't your own, incidentally, like, something from history or something like that before you were born, you know. So those are examples of the subjectivity of the perception of alleged time being outside, like delocalized from the physical body doing the perceiving. The idea of time being merely perceptually events after each other is bogus. That's not how it happens. There's people who are without doing any postcognition or precognition are sitting there and they're remembering an event from 20 or 30 years earlier, or they're learning about an event that someone else had 20 or 30 years earlier, and it's not actually 20 or 30 years earlier when that happens. That's called memory and sharing memory through story. And so the actual time idea as events is the people sharing the memory of the story. That's the actual events, the actual so-called time dimension that you would project onto that would be that particular sequence or scene of individuals talking about a memory. And that's distinct from what you might call post-cognition or precognition, for example. Which is a form of non-local awareness outside of the so-called space-time point of the percipient. The idea that perceptual time is only linear events is crap on that basis alone. That objectively they mean physical plane stuff. So for the esoterists out there, they mean physical plane. Okay, they don't necessarily mean object as in ashtray, although that is a physical plane object as well. That means objectively this is an ashtray. Subjectively it's a cat of spring beans. No, just kidding. Sorry, puffing on cigarettes here. Yeah, the great thing about smoking is a good excuse to sidetrack your trade of non-thought, just words. Anyway, it's the other thing too. Psychology tends to, or common perceptions of psychology tends to struggle to distinguish between words and thoughts. So sometimes people, not necessarily psychology actually, maybe community perceptions or common patterns about psychology might assume that thoughts and words are the same thing. When thoughts are probably the ideas behind the words. And so when you start getting into the level of the ideas behind the words, and notice that colour blindness is a very pertinent example of an objectable, testable experience of someone who is more than cogent when he talks. He's quite articulate, and yes, does have very good artistic skills. So he's not blind, and yet that capability with language and that capability with art, and a few other things as well, and even capability driving, was that ain't read to him, right? Okay, not trying to talk out of school here, but that's a very telling story, because it's a teaching story, because it shows that language is not the truth of the situation. It shows that the objective truth of the situation, of what the actual colour of the object is not the truth of the situation either. It shows that the actual perception of what that object is in fact subjective. Okay? So what is presumed to be an objective experience of reality is in fact a subjective one. Okay? Okay, so when someone assumes that two different people can and ought to experience this reality the same way they do, okay, they're full of shit. They're absolutely full of shit. If someone assumes that when compared to another person's type of skill would qualify as a disability, is incapable in the more general skills associated with that particular sense or perceptual capability, they're also full of shit. That one story can tell you that, because he is a wonderful drawer. He's fantastic at art, and yet he's colourblind. Okay, and right, he's one of the best. And there's another story, another guy who's an artist. Okay, he's dyslexic, and that means he can't read and write. Okay, but wow, has he got the gift of the gab? He can talk the leg off a chair, to use that Australian aphorism. He can absolutely. Another aphorism is he can talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles. Okay, which is probably an Australian aphorism, and he is so good with words. He's not even stupid. He's actually quite smart. He has his own perceptual issues, the same as anyone else. His own variety of them is probably more accurate. Nonetheless, he can't read and write. So you can't assume that one category of skill overrules the capability of other skills in those categories. People with autism are like that too, particularly Asperger's. You're talking about people who are hyperfluent with language, and yet for some reason normies think they're bad at it. It's a little bit confusing. Okay, so you find that funny? And Asperger's people are supposed to be hyperfluent with language. They're really good with words. They're like that lady in that physics video. They're using big words and lots of them, and with complicated ideas behind them. But other people just go, we don't know what you're talking about, right? You're bad with language, Aspie. And it's like, well, actually, you just don't know what the Aspie's talking about, so this, And so the translation issues are there, okay? Because just because that non-Aspie isn't hyperfluent, okay, in the same language variety that the Aspie is, it doesn't mean they're both bad at language. They've got different ways of doing language, okay? In a similar way to a physicist and a mechanic, both really good about mechanical stuff, just in a different way. So if you're into mechanical thermodynamics or some physics thing like that, okay, we won't trust you to fix the car, but we'll sure as shit trust you to talk about it at length in a lot of jargon, okay? And we'll ask the mechanic to fix the car, thank you very much. Right? Okay? Okay? So neither of you are fucking stupid, for fuck's sake. Anyway, right, so the subjectivity going on there is that different people have different experiences of perceiving this event stuff that we talk about. So the event of the cigarette just got put up and put in the mouth. Another one got lit because, chain smoking is a really great example to set people, isn't it? Well, obviously it isn't. We're doing it anyway. So, perceptually, he's seeing the light flashing in and out like there's some kind of distortion going on in the video periodically. Notice that as it's recording. There is no environmental reference to that. Even tested tapping the table to see if shaking was causing that, and it didn't actually, you notice that? It didn't cause it. Okay, so don't know what did. Anyway, it's going on too much. Trying to get this language. So when you talk really, really technically with the big flash jargon, it sounds like you're saying something complicated, but she's not. She's saying something really simple. Okay, there's a lot of complicated consequences for it as far as the rest of her profession is concerned when it comes to, doing CERN stuff, okay, with quantum this and that, okay. However, there's an idea there that is a bit simpler than her words are portraying from a different perspective. And the idea is that the subjective experience of time is the only thing that exists about time. Okay, so the truth of the situation is that time is completely and utterly subjective. There is no material or objective basis to it at all. Okay? And that surprises people because they see the sun going up and down just the same as anyone else. Usually. And if they're blind, well, they felt the sun when it wasn't there, it was there, and didn't feel it when it wasn't because it's pretty bloody warm. So we're going to hazard a guess and presume within a fair margin of error that the vast majority of the time this thing called the sun is something that everyone that's human knows about, and also non-humans because they live on planet Earth too. Okay, so if that's the case, right? Okay, right? That this thing that we've used to project this non-existent dimension called time onto to relate objects such as where the sun is and whether or not snow is going to kill us, okay? In Australia it never does because we don't get it, okay? The perspective of time is actually quite different in Australia, perceptually, because of the no snow thing. The language of time and calendars and clocks doesn't quite feel the same as the environment does. There's a jarring dissonance there. That the Australian climate is quite distinct from the variations of English that are commonly spoken on the Australian continent. So the language and the environment are not the same. So the objective reality of temperature and light and language it doesn't work. Like there's something that doesn't, there's something that's not adding up. And it seems to have something to do with that snow cult thing they've got in Europe. Like how all their calendars and their economics and stuff like that comes from snow cult. Okay, so the snow happened right, and nearly killed everyone for 4 months of the year, and then, 8 or 9 months of the year is spent stashing everything away and building up resources so that snow time is survivable. It's got lots of firewood and tin food in the pantry or something like that, okay, called snow cult, and all their religions and everything came out from there. It's not adding up in Australia. It's really not. So sort of different attitude to things might come about from that, or might not, depending on who's experiencing it and what their perspective is and stuff like that. I'm not saying there's a right way or a wrong way, just saying that there's no the sort of breaking time up, so-called time up into 4 years and the 4 periods in the calendar for seasons doesn't work, because there isn't 4 seasons. And so that kind of tempo or language frequency usage of time, and this is in the microscopic ordinary sense. We're not even talking about perceptual or objectivity when it comes to physics or whatever. We're just talking normal social life and economic life. The language and the environment aren't matching, okay? So the perception is different from the reality. The language and the custom is different from the reality, and that can be a bit jarring for people. It's probably caused anxiety for Australian people to have to do that. And so, particularly like when a socioeconomic system or political system has to revolve around the politics of the Northern Hemisphere, and, imports and exports and all that. So it's a bit, kind of a thing to point out. It sounds like it's deceptively simple in how it sounds. It can be quite complicated in how it's experienced. And so this is the assumption that time exists because the sun's going around the sky is objectively crap. Okay? The event of an object being in motion is there. The event of a perceiver, we're not even going to talk into the complex way that she was attempting to articulate what observers actually are, and to distinguish those ideas potentially from the way that's been comprehended or miscomprehended by the esotericists as well, or spiritualists or whatever. We're not even going to get into that. We'll just say ordinary use of the word perceiver, a physical body, in case this one, experiences sunlight coming through that window over there. This has language references to indicate so-called time of day, based on the passage of the sun, whichever direction it's going in, can indicate that potentially. Okay. Maybe morning refers to the sun's appeared again, and afternoon refers to the sun's going away again, right? Perceptually, okay? In perceptually, they know that it looks like the sun's moving, but actually it's the earth moving on its axis, right? So the subjective versus the objective turned out not to be the same, right? And the hyper focus of sort of language, okay, to try and articulate ideas, okay. There's a thing going on there with the physicists where there seems to be something beyond the operational definition requirement of science, why they seem to be one of the groups of people that are prone to using jargon and the bias that makes them sound like they're talking about something more complicated than they really are in one small part of their greater discussion. Other areas they're talking about is very complicated, but one area is not so complicated. And it seems to be that they're proving Kant correct, like Immanuel Kant correct, like in his Critique of Pure Reason, but they're struggling to deal with the fact that they are. Now, explain that for a second, okay? Okay. They've already shown in the 2022 Nobel Prize for Physics, this idea that the projected imaginal construct called space-time, the thing that people invented to compare objects. There's no line between these two objects. There's no line. But you can project one somehow, imagine one somehow to compare the two. But you can. Okay. That sort of they seem to be struggling with the idea that they made up the line between these two objects. They seem to be struggling with the idea that the line between these two objects doesn't actually exist. And that's kind of weird because they're the people that are supposed to be focused on these objects only and telling all the other people, you can't talk about the imaginary line between the objects because that's imaginary, but yet that's what they're doing all of the time. And the confusion between subjectivity and objectivity that could create has, on one hand, kind of contributed to some kind of technological revolution. On the other hand, it has furthered the bias of complicated sound and language implying greater complexity of thought, if that makes any sense. Not to say that her thoughts aren't complicated, because they're very complicated. It's more the point that in other fields of endeavour, not just that one, the jargon can imply to naive listeners that, they sound really smart, they're using big talk, right? Okay, and they are using big talk. However, that bias might mean that some people who aren't using big talk might be perceived as not having big ideas, and that's where you've got to draw the line. Do you draw the line there and then take a step to the side and say, well, with Donald Trump, for example, he isn't really known for using complex jargon when he talks. And he is known for dropping a word like tariff in a way that others have commentated not a good idea. And not really necessarily the correct use of the term either. Donald Trump and jargon, suffice to say, don't get along. Okay? And the perception is that he's kind of a dummy. Okay? He looks like he's kind of a dummy because he says too many things that are stupid to begin with, but even if he weren't, he'd be conveying them in a way that doesn't sound smart, but is quote-unquote accessible. Okay, so the accessibility of his talk meant that he appealed to an audience that isn't really big on jargon, and maybe doesn't have training in public policy or economics or something like that. So they didn't know he was talking crap. He didn't know he was talking crap. So how do you take that out and put it over here and then see what the intellect behind that really is? Well, that's a different analysis. However, if it's possible for people to acknowledge that space-time doesn't objectively exist, it is in fact perceptual, then you might get somewhere. However, the esotericists need to comprehend that the world is not a projection of your mind. Okay, it's not that either. It's not the same thing. There are some things that are projections of your mind and some things that are not projections of your mind. However, you need to define the word mind properly. Okay, and thus far, psychology hasn't done that. And because psychology hasn't done that, and the spiritualists haven't done that either, or the spiritual traditions haven't done that either, then the objectivists or whatever are from the physics and computer people who far too often have been politically like with the famous ones that are politically going down sort of like the polarization path, and really shouldn't have anything to do with that Curtis Yarb and stuff, because objectively it's crap, not just subjectively. Assuming physicists did, but anyway, okay, you need to challenge there's some review out there. Do a video response if you can on why you think Donald Trump is a genius. Why do you think Donald Trump's a genius? Bet someone out there does. Why do you think the guy's a genius? Not what is he a genius at, although that might be an example that gets the conversation going. Why is he a genius? Okay, he's got some kind of smart going on. It doesn't seem to make objective sense that he could be Ajit Krasnov since 1987, have 6 bankruptcies, umpteen freaking court cases, including defamation convictions and the 34 convictions of fraud, owe millions of dollars in fines, be not a particularly affable character in the way that he presents on stage, even have members of his party giving Nazi salutes, and apparently this was going on before Musk, and somehow he's as dumb as a doorpost. Okay, it doesn't seem to make cultural sense that in the 21st century, after 80 years of storytelling and memories, lived experiences, people with actual, concentration camp tattoos, for fuck's sake, and all the political events that happened, not just the perceived ones through technology or whatever, but like a television or whatever, but actually spending time with people who were there when it happened or had a near relative or friend who did, and for those people, those events were real, and they can tell you about it, and you learn about it from them, and they're clearly not bullshitting. That's their story, that's their truth, and it's like, in the case of the Nuremberg trials, did the Masonic Lodge that encouraged the Nazi Party to form the Thule Society appear there to explain why they were connected up with the Kybalion New Thought movement of Atkinson in the 1880s and Manu Blatsky's ideas when they did so? And if so, why they would support the idea of people engaging in soul contracting before they are born, considering none of the people that went to the concentration camps were, they didn't agree to that, let's put it that way. And same with anyone else who lost their home, their life, or a relative's life during the war, that war. That's just one war of many. All those other people, you can't say they made a contract with some kind of galactic federation or something before they were born. Okay? Seriously. Now, it probably is a mistake to say that Trump is a Catholic at this point, but is that guy doing some kind of parody, maybe? Is he doing a parody? Is Donald Trump doing a parody? He's done parodies before. Oh, it's back on Reporter, he said. The guy's probably got Korsakoff syndrome, right? So he confabulates. Okay, right? Too many drinks in the 19th hole. Right? But is he doing parody? Is he showing everyone the parody of the American success story? The billionaire who was corrupt and acting as a foreign operative, who expects not to be treated the same way he treated a previous administration. So the ones that stormed the White House under the Biden administration were insurrectionists, apparently. But if they would have stormed Donald Trump, they'd also be insurrectionists. But Biden wasn't talking about never leaving the office, or the idea there might not be elections again. Trump also has no reason to believe that he would, that we know of, that he would be able to stay there for much longer. The guy's 78 years old. Like, even if the military doesn't straight up shoot him on his birthday, like, he's an old man. Even if this idea of aging and dying is merely perceptual, it's a fairly persistent illusion, isn't it? That people, when they get older, particularly that age, are an increased probability of, carking it. And so, what's he really talking about? Why was Juice Media saying that there was before the election is Australia's last free and fair election? Why is there so much apocalyptic talk coming from these different groups? Why is that happening? Why has that happened? What is objectively true and what is subjectively true are two very different things. We're not seeing objectively, we're seeing, objectively, Orion's in the wrong part of the sky. Objectively, there's these people on YouTube acting like they're hobos with tinfoil hats in New York City in the 1980s. Objectively also, other than some climate change stuff that happened, or is that climate change or not? Is it just, inclement weather? El Nino and El Nino patterns, with the floods that happened on the east coast of Australia a couple of years back. Is that climate change? Or is that, great beasts coming out of the sea? On that subject, actually, let's talk about the Book of Revelations. Okay? Has there actually been a beast come out of the sea yet? Has anyone seen a beast rise out of the sea that fits that character's description? If so, where did you see it? Have you got footage? That appears to be subjective, not objective, that idea. There appears to be a subjective idea floating around of this end-of-world type stuff. But objectively, despite some unusual phenomena, the world is really carrying on mostly like normal. The resorting of people culturally to think it's literally the fucking apocalypse because everyone got the collective sniffles for a couple of years is a bit much. The other events in the story have not come to pass. Perceptually, for some people, they might have. But perceptually and objectively is not the same. People can perceive events in order or out of order. It doesn't mean they're out of order here, they're merely perceived that way, because even within the realms of spirits or minds, for lack of a better word, those perceptual spaces or realms, just because they say it was 1 year, it doesn't mean it was. Take, for example, the V2K people or whatever they're called, who reckon the CIA did a time travel experiment in 1999. No, they didn't. The USSF did one in 2020. Okay, so there was no event in 1999. Okay, there was no causal event that year. The causal event was 2020. So the event didn't happen that year. It could have had a consequence that year, okay? But the consequence is not the consequence that's perceived right now. The consequence that's perceived right now is flowing after 2020. Because it is after 2020, to use that language. Okay? Not before. After. Okay? So this idea of astral time, to use that language, being different from objective time is crap. There's not time in either place. But it's also the case that events follow one after the other in both spaces. Okay? And you can perceive outside of that, but not cause outside of that. Okay? So if you perceive, this is very important. If you do a remote viewing and you perceive cognitively something, or post-cognitively something, okay, perceiving and causing is not the same thing. You're not doing something to someone or something just by looking at it. Okay, so this sort of idea that people are struggling with is this idea that's because they looked at something that they might have caused it, okay, is erroneous. Okay, there's a misperception of causality going on with the spiritualists, with the esotericists. Okay, causality is not about you looking at it. Okay, these spiritualists and this observer effect crap. Okay, they've taken an idea completely out of context. And if you listen to that woman in a video again, she's trying to describe how complicated this idea of observer is, and how they're not actually sure what that really means. There's a different way of looking at things, and also the idea that the observer in those double slit experiments was a camera or a machine, not a person. So this sort of complexity of the observer effect doesn't mean you caused it because you looked at it, or because it looked at you. Okay, the observer effect in physics doesn't mean that. Okay, and these spiritualists and these esotericists have taken that out of context, like they have with so many other things, and it's caused people confusion. It's caused people harm. The USSF has also caused people confusion and caused people harm by creating an actual time travel loop between 2020 and 1999. However, no causal events occurred in 1999. They all occurred in 2020. And the way that it was done affected more than one timeline. Not as it was before 2020, as it was after 2020. Okay? And if you can comprehend that, you'll have cracked the code of reality. But if you're struggling with it, don't feel bad about it. Okay? Don't feel bad about it if you're struggling with what that means. And as it stands, we've got physicists, esotericists, spiritualists, techno-feudalists, fucking Christ knows what else, this body included, crapping on and on and on and on about ideas that none of the groups comprehend: mind, consciousness, language, time, space-time, projection, distortion, illusion. It's just babble. Isn't it? It's just babble. So this assumption that one worldview is better than the other, the assumption that someone's cracked reality is just because they knew how to, smash someone over the head with a brick hammer or something like that, a brick or a hammer, okay, is not the same fucking thing as what reality is. How you perceive reality to be and the language you describe it, neither are the same. And your systems and your worldviews about it are going to be illusory correlations and crap. like Kabbalah, for example, it's obviously illusory correlations and crap, just because there is such a thing as what's called, what's it called? Immaterial polydualism. It doesn't necessarily follow that the Sephiroths are correct, or the perception of the tree of death system, for example, is correct. No, it's not. They've got the angle. I had to look it up to see what this meant, okay? And only very briefly found out, okay? There's the angry ones, and then there's the confused ones and stuff like that. And there's these one-dimensional characters flying around these places that are like programs, not like people. And it's like, yeah, because that system isn't spiritual reality. It's not what reality is. It's not what people actually are. Okay, it's denying people their complexity. God, that's stereotypes at best. And at worst, it's straight up dishonest. Okay? It's crap. Okay? It's crap. Okay? Okay? It's dualistic. It's what? Comprehend that the word dualism in that situation does not imply the same meaning as polydualism. Polydualism means more than one and they're different from each other. Dualistically, in the other context, means binary. Okay? Black and white thinking. Borderline personality disorder style thinking. Okay? Okay? It's good or bad. You know? It's male or female. It's light or dark. It's God versus the devil. Okay? That kind of crap. Okay? Okay? If you don't understand what's being said, you're not dumb. If you do and you've got a better idea, that's okay. Okay? But it's plain to see that everyone's been fibbed to with language. The language of computer programs making algorithms to funnel and tunnel people into these groups that they might not rightfully belong in. These places they don't belong in. These lives they don't belong in. Okay? Okay? Here, they deliberately deceive you with language, and you fell for it. You're not a retarded spacker. And even if you were a retarded spacker, so what? It's not your fault. They were lying. They should cop the consequences, not you. Ask why they're lying to you, not whether or not you're an autistic spacker who needs to be treated like this on TV by Trump. That's the autistic people out there. Okay, if you're having trouble picking up on someone's deceiving you, how about you start asking why they're so full of shit? Not how you're damaged, why they're damaged. Why they're ethically damaged. Why they don't respect you. It's not that you're not respectable. Why aren't they doing it? No? Go on, America. You think you're a bunch of smarty pantses, don't you? But you're all words. And the words coming out of each one of your mouths is completely different from each other, including in the same political parties. And we don't know what you're talking about.